there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourse. Today we're continuing our examination of Book 2, looking at today Chapter 6. Last week we looked at 5 about the question of, why do we forget ancient times? Looked at the question of both human and natural reasons of this, and now he turns to the question of war making, right? How the Romans waged war, how the Romans proceeded in making war. So let's turn to the chapter. Having discoursed how the Romans proceeded in expanding, we shall now discourse on how they proceeded in making war. In every action of theirs, it will be seen with how much prudence they deviated from the universal mode of others, so as to make easy for themselves the way to arrive at a supreme greatness. In other words, he's saying that people waging war, the universal mode of doing things, the Romans will deviate from that, and they'll deviate because of their prudence, their judgment. Leads them to deviate. And why? So that they will achieve supreme greatness. They will be a better outcome. The intention of whoever makes war through choice, or in truth, ambition, so if it's through choice or in truth because of ambition, is to acquire and maintain the acquisition, and to proceed with it so that it enriches and does not impoverish the country and his fatherland. So therefore, the reason why you make war, or you have the ambition to make war, in other words, it's you do make a war of choice, but really this is because of ambition. It's the desire to acquire, right? Again, this is the famous that famous line from The Prince. Everyone is the desire to acquire is universal, right? But this is the desire to acquire and maintain the thing we acquire, the acquisition, right? And to proceed with it so that it enriches, benefits, and does not impoverish the country that it's being taken, that's being done, it's being added to, or that the thing was the thing that was taken will benefit the people that acquired it. That it should not impoverish them, it should benefit them, it should not harm them. It is necessary then, in acquiring and in maintaining, not to think of spending, but instead to do everything for the utility of the public. So in other words, you don't think about spending, in maintaining. In other words, it is necessary then in acquiring and maintaining, not to think of cost, spending, right? But instead to do everything for the utility of his public, the public good. In other words, that whoever wishes to do all these things must take a Roman style and mode. In other words, if you wish to take the beneficial and use to do it for the public good, then you need to do it, and you don't worry about you're not going to pay it. You're going to sacrifice in order to achieve something. It's going to be as long as what it is delivered is for the public good. You have to act in the Roman style and mode. This was first to make their wars, as the French say, short and massive. In other words, no long wars. So short, massive. Big, you send all your forces to do a big battle or a big thing, massive. So you defeat your enemy, you destroy. So short and massive. Since they came into the field with big armies, all the wars they had with the Latins, Semites, and Tuscans were dispatched in a very brief time. So again, this is the idea. You should don't want long war. You should come in and fight. Come in with enough force, build a huge force so you have overwhelming power, and fight a quick battle. Right? Not long wars. And if all those that they made from the beginning of Rome up to the siege of the Veientines are noted, all will be seen to have been dispatched, some 6, some 10, some in 20 days, right? The siege of Villy took 10 years. The siege of Villy took 10 years, Livy 5. For example, of such short wars, see Livy's 2, Book 2, 26-27, Book 3, 26-39, Book 4, 31-34, and 45-47. For examples of some longer wars, see Book 3, 2, and 23. Livy does not specify the length of most Roman laws. Through his narration, he often gives the impressions that they were short, right? So that's the first account. Okay, short wars. For their usage was this. As soon as the war was declared, or uncovered, right? This is where declared or uncovered. In Italian, the word is uncovered, but he said that the war was, discerned, disclosed. They came outside with their armies opposite the enemy and at once did battle. So once it was won, the enemy agreed to conditions so that their countryside would not be quite spoiled. The Romans condemned them to a loss of land, which land they converted to private advantage or consigned to a colony that, placed on their frontiers, came to be a guard of the Roman borders, useful to the colonists who had those fields, and useful to the Roman public who kept that guard without much expense, right? So that again, this is Livy 2:31, Livy 3, chapter 1, books 10, Livy 1, and Prince 3. Prince chapter 3, right? You create a you create a colony. Why you create a new territory there that just becomes a guard for you. It's your colony. It's there, and therefore the people who get it get land and get better land and things that they had before. They're benefited, and they're providing a service by being a guard for the border, right? Nor could this mode be more secure, stronger, or more useful. For while the enemy were not in the field, that God was enough. And if they came outside massively to crush that colony, the Romans also came outside massively and came to a battle with them, right? So therefore, this is the strategy. So therefore, the guard like this, and therefore everything's fine. But when the opposing sees to grab it, they attack the colony. Well, then the Romans have enough time to bring their army to there and to fight with the colony against the attackers, right? The battle with them. When the battle was done and won, having imposed heavier conditions on them, they returned home. So therefore, they now impose more conditions on the defeater, because they attacked. And when the battle was done and won, having imposed heavier conditions on them, thus they gradually came to acquire a reputation over them and force within themselves. In other words, the word gradually here is again literally from hand to hand. In other words, it's from hand to hand. By their actions, their deeds, their actions, one after the other, hence gradually came to acquire a reputation. Romans did. In other words, how they proceeded, and the force within themselves. Paragraph 2. They continued to take this mode until they changed their mode of proceeding in war. This was after the siege of the Veientines, when, to be able to make war at length, they ordered the paying of soldiers, whom they did not pay before, since it was not necessary when the wars were brief, right? This is literally 5 Livy 4, 59 and 60. So when the wars were brief, the citizens were doing it. Now they had to pay their soldiers, right? Because the wars were no longer brief. So that they, although if Rome gave that pay, and by virtue of this could make longer war, In other words, they gave the pay, and by virtue of this, they could make longer laws. And although necessary, kept them more in the field because they made them at a greater distance, nevertheless, they never varied from the first order of finishing them quickly, according to the places and their times, nor did they ever vary from sending colonies. So again, the Romans would send, in other words, even if they made bigger armies and now they fought wars further away, they still did it this way. They chose to come with overwhelming force, win quickly, and then set up a colony, set up someone who's going to be of Roman, loyal to Rome, who would then act as a security or guard to protect Roman interests. And if anything happened, they were attacked or something, the Roman could send an army to protect them, right? In other words, for beside their natural usage, the ambition of the consuls kept them in the first order, that of making wars brief. So the consuls, because again, the consuls, remember, the consuls elected were yearly. So the nature of the consuls themselves kept that you couldn't really go for many-year war. It would be the ambition of the consul. The consul would want war to achieve their reputation, to achieve some greatness or a reputation, so that maybe in the future they could get another office or something like that. But they couldn't get reelected, the original consuls, in that sense, because they'd be elected every 2 years, and it wasn't a good thing that you reelect a consul. It was bad form, right? So therefore the nature of the consuls kept the wars brief, since they had a term of a year to serve, and of that year 6 months were in quarters. They wished to finish the war as to have a triumph, right? They wanted to have a triumph, so 6 months had to be in quarters, and they needed to finish the war so that they have something. So it's useful. The triumph is how the Romans celebrated someone to accomplish something. So its usefulness and its great advantage resulting from the sending of colonies kept them to it. In other words, as Rome grew bigger and bigger, they could send colonies out, and that the colonies would be. Therefore, they kept on the ambition of this, the ambition of the consuls to have a quick war, to achieve it. The nature of the consuls wanted short wars, and then that would achieve a benefit, a utility that would be recognized as something beneficial for the Romans, and that therefore they had to do it. And he says, the usefulness and great advantage resulting from the sending of colonies kept them to it. They varied somewhat about the booty. In other words, about the booty, they sometimes they weren't consistent. They were not as liberal with it as they had been at first. So that at first they were liberal with the booty, with the things they captured, but now later they kind of were less and less liberal. The Republic, in other words, both because it did not seem to them so necessary, since the soldiers had a salary, and because they planned once the booty was larger to fatten the public with it, so that they would not be constrained to carry on campaigns with taxes from the city. In other words, once soldiers were paid, therefore when soldiers weren't paid, booty was the main doing it. But now soldiers are paid, so you don't really want them, and now you have to pay the taxes of this. So you didn't want the public to bear the taxes, so the booty covered the cost of the war, and therefore had to cover the public costs. Okay, that's why they changed the nature of how they handled the booty. In a very little time, this order made their treasury very rich. These two modes about distributing the beauty and sending colonies, thus made Rome get rich from war, whereas other princes and republics, not being wise, impoverished themselves from it. So again, this is the thing. The Romans, the way they proceeded in war, quick war, short war, overwhelming force, make sure you profit from it. And the profit should not come from, in other words, the war, the benefits of the war should pay for the war. In other words, yes, you pay the citizens from taxation, therefore the reward now goes, the booty now needs to go to cover the cost of the war, right? This is the benefit must necessarily do this. The thing reached the limits when the consuls did not appear able to have a triumph, if with his triumph he did not bring very much gold and silver and every other sort of booty into the treasury. So therefore, there's a limit. That was a kind of, the thing reached a limit when, okay, you couldn't do a triumph now. You couldn't afford the festivity and the thing of the triumph because you had to pay everything else off. So if the war didn't, and therefore what? Remember, the triumph is the way they settled. The consul satisfied his ambition through the public adoration and a triumph, right? So therefore, this is the idea. The triumph was the means of honor and status that the ambitious consuls would seek. Okay. So, but now the problem is that things reached the limit when the consul did not appear to have enough to have a triumph. If with his triumph he did not bring enough to pay everything, right? Thus the Romans, through the limits written above and through finishing war quickly, were able to wear out their enemies at length through defeats, through raids, and through accords made to their own advantage. In other words, they made agreements. In other words, they entered into, in other words, they either military defeats or they would engage in raiding. Their threat, the people who threatened them, and they could do so. They would destroy forces that would threaten them. And then last, they would make agreements, accords, but to their advantage, right? Becoming every richer and every more powerful, right? And this is how Machiavelli ends chapter 6. So let's stop here. We end the chapter. So you have any questions or comments, please put them below and I will respond to them when I see them. Please like the chapter, hit the like button, hit the like, that helps the algorithm. And if you liked it, share it with your friends, share it on your social media, share it to your friends through email and things like this. Share it far and wide. And if you've not subscribed, do subscribe. Encourage other people to come and subscribe. Because again, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing, all of these things improve the algorithm of YouTube's algorithm and the Google algorithm, so that when people searching for discourse, a Machiavelli or discourses or something Roman history or they'll come across these videos. Now, if you didn't like it, you can of course say thumbs down. Oh, I didn't like say why you didn't like it in the comments. Put in the comments why you didn't like it. Oh, your fan is too loud. Okay, say that it again, the purpose of this is more to educate and to help people. So put a comment that people can will benefit from, and that if your criticism, if you're going to benefit from, and I'll respond to it if I have I may say okay, you're right, or in other words, or I will give it a response to it, a thoughtful response to it in that sense. If it's thoughtful, respond, question or criticism. What else? Oh yeah, you can follow me on social media. The social media links below. If you want to know more about me as a researcher and academic, you can below the social media links, there's the academic social media links, so you can check my scholarship out and things like that. If you want to help me to do what I do, financially in that sense, you can contribute through Subscribestar or Patreon. I don't really have many people doing that, so it'd be nice if people did it. I don't have a big fan base. I'm not that popular. I don't do sexy stuff. I'm doing this kind of boring stuff. I understand. What else? Or you can, another way you can help is buy one of my books listed below. I have the books listed below. You can order them. The ebook you should order from. You can take the title of the ebook, the last book, and you can find it on many sources. In fact, you even probably find the Warsaw University Press mostly is ebook. But all the three books, you can usually find the normal published books. You're not finding at your bookstore. You can find either through an online distributor like Barnes & Noble, Libris, Amazon, Book Depository, or through the publishers directly. And the ebook that I have is you can find it usually on most ebook things like Amazon, Kindle, and other things, or through Lulu, the publisher directly. And that's it. I hope you guys had a good time. We'll look at the next chapter, chapter I think 7. Okay. Well, take care and have a great day. Bye bye.